inevitably when we talk about things at a national level, they tend to be, well, we have specifically made them to be based on principles rather than the detail. And I think it's important to know the history and the principles behind the nature of clusters, the change in the way we address quality, and the role of cluster quality leads. So I spent most of last night, till quite late actually, digging out the actual words we've said in the various contract iterations, even the ones leading up to the big contract change last year, because it has all been said in the agreed documents, a lot about what the principles are behind the changes. So I think that's what I'm going to take you through today, is that now a lot of these slides are quite wordy. I broke my rules and had too many words, but I'm going to point out the key points. Some of them you just have to get the key point from different things, and you might want to refer back to them when you're trying to say, what are we trying to do here, and what's the principle behind what we're doing. So the key thing here is that we're talking about outcomes, and that's why we've changed from quality processes, which was largely what COF is about, to start focusing on what actually happens to our patients. I usually say when you get anybody in the NHS, manager, clinician, whoever, you scratch them a little bit, and underneath it you find they want to make things better for patients. It's a great motivator to all of us who work in the NHS. When you have people from abroad, they talk about the non-cash benefits of working in the NHS. And one of them is you're allowed to try and make things much better for patients without thinking about how much you earn from it. So, when we talk about the extrinsic role, so let's go into that a bit more. So why did the government listen to us about why they're going to invest in primary care at all? Because for years we've been, my whole career it's been a primary care-led NHS, except it hasn't been. And for a long time, particularly since 2004, no government in the UK was willing to put investment into GPs particularly. You know, we go into the reasons why, a lot of them are to do with principles as well, but no money was going to come towards general practice to allow it to change. So what got the government interested? Well, it's basically demographic change, because we've got this massive change in demographics. If we keep doing what we're doing now in terms of how we practice medicine, the way it's hospital-based, you know, we're not going to have enough resources. You cannot build enough hospitals to keep doing things that way. And there are lots of figures. One of the ones that was quoted is that 30% of hospital bed days are used by people who are going to die within a fairly short space of time. There's a good case to say they're not getting good care, and yet they're using up a lot of the resources. And if we freed up 30% of hospital resources, that's a lot of money to do good that we'd know would make a difference. So what we said is general practice is the answer to that. It's the right kind of medicine for the future needs of patients of Scotland. So the government said, okay, we're willing to invest, but not directly into GP accounts. So fair enough, we had to invent a somewhat complex manner to do that. But that's what got them to invest, and I have to say, if we don't deal with that demographic change well, the NHS will fail in my view. So I have no bones about saying one of the key things that clusters have to achieve is dealing with more complex patients in their own homes. It's right for the patients, it's right for the country, and it will make the NHS effective and affordable in future. So everyone ends up concluding that care at home is the right answer. I was then going to look back in history to when did we start talking about GP's involvement in the overall system quality in the NHS. Well, in 2015, under localities guidance, and you don't have to read all of that, but it says here that one of the criticisms of CHPs was the lack of opportunities for communities of professionals, including GPs, taking an active role in providing leadership for local planning of service provision. So even back in 2015, it's been recognised that if you don't involve the clinicians, you've got a major problem. You're not likely to succeed. Shona Robeson, 2015, previous Cabinet Secretary for Health, also said a vision about primary community at the heart of healthcare, saying that primary healthcare professionals will be involved in the strategic planning of our health services. That was back in 2015, government intention to get clinicians involved in that. Under the TQA in 2016, which actually started the whole cluster of business, we started this before we did the new contract, because we had to change the nature of quality and the involvement of clinicians in how the health service works. So this is the document, so it's a bit dry, but if you haven't looked at it recently, this one sets up clusters and CQLs. So, talking about changing the contribution that general practice makes to patient outcomes in the GMS contract, even back in 2016, it's all about patient outcome changes. Moving away from the QOF, which we then subsequently got rid of, and a structured collaborative approach, peer-led, values-driven. So this was 2 years before we actually introduced the whole new GP contract. So these ideas were being explored way back, and I do commend you to look back at that document. Talking about the values-driven governance, reflecting and sensitive to the different needs of different communities. That's why you're all doing slightly different things. Why we didn't specify at national level what you had to do. Because we recognised we're all in different places in our communities, and you know best how to start addressing them. The new Scottish GP will be the heart of quality improvement, so there's a specific role for GPs to be involved in that. It's never been so clear that we are to be involved in our new role in overall performance of the NHS and how the quality of care can be improved. And meaningfully engages every GP in the quality agenda. That's why clusters are so small. That's why every practice sends a PQL. So every clinician has to be involved in this, because there's a lot of evidence that it's very difficult to influence clinicians to change their clinical decisions, especially for high-risk ones about keeping people at home and managing risk in the community. That's a very individual clinician-specific activity. So if you want success in those complex decisions, every clinician must be involved in this clinical quality agenda. That's why every practice is engaged. That's why it reaches into every single practice. And an opportunity for GP leadership to have influence, impact and benefits much wider and greater than just at the individual and practice level. So we're being quite explicit. It's not just about the patient in front of you or your own practice list. It's about your communities and the overall functioning of the health service. And that's a much more explicit intention of GPs having to take on that role, and a bit more about how we decided whether we do it later on. And also removing the link between achievement and payment. You can sum that up, obviously. We saw that the transactional nature of GP's relationship with the NHS, you give me some money, you don't give me enough money for this, has broken down the essential clinical relationships with other professionals, but also with managers in the NHS. A huge distance and gulf that appeared between us and them since 2004, and has been to the detriment of the NHS and patient care. So the patients in Glasgow usually think of themselves as relating to their GP, and we generally just think of ourselves as relating to our own patients. And that's kind of the traditional model that we would see ourselves in. Now, we had a discussion with government. We said, do you want us engaged at all in this, giving you advice on how to make the NHS work better? Or actually, to be honest, we could just do our clinical work, stay in our consulting room and go home at the end of the day and have nothing to do with it. If you don't want us, just tell us now, because it's much simpler, and we'll just say, GP's job is to be a clinician and pay no attention to how the rest of the NHS works. We're quite willing to do that because we're too busy. And they thought about it, and we balanced this. Shall we just be internally focused, or shall we have an external focus? In the end, the government said, no, we want you explicitly to have as part of your role to be involved in the overall functioning of the NHS. And this was one of the reasons why. Alistair Noble was a retired GP from there, and one of the things he said during our many discussions is the clinical decision is the spending or commissioning decision. Clinicians actually spend the NHS's money by the decisions they make, and it's extremely difficult for managers to influence those. And if the clinicians are detached from what it costs and how their spending influences other parts of the NHS, then you're in big trouble. Secondary care medicine is generating more and more costs, not always for better health outcomes. And that's, in my view, because clinicians are detached from the opportunity costs of what they spend. If you spend more on that MRI scanner, somebody else is not getting a home help or blood test or help in somewhere else. No matter how much money they give us, we'll never have all the money we could spend in healthcare. So we have to find ways of using what we have to get better outcomes. And we all have to be engaged in this. If we're detached from that spending decision, then the money won't be well spent and we will not manage to achieve what we need to achieve. The NHS will not survive. So that's at the basis of why every clinician has to be involved somehow in how well we're spending the money to get good patient outcomes. And the contract itself, when published, says it's intended that GPs will become better embedded in HSCPs as the senior clinical leaders working collaboratively with managers to achieve better outcomes for patients. Page 26. That's agreed between the profession and the government, and through our MOU, through HSCPs. A very strong principle that we work collaboratively with managers to improve outcomes for patients. A new cultural shift and paradigm in which we're going to work. So, not just are we going to look to our own patients and our own consulting rooms, but through clusters we relate to how the overall system works and trying to make it work better and deciding, is this the right way to spend the money? Should we be doing something better with the money to achieve better outcomes for patients, given it's always going to be a limited pot? So again, go back to the TQ arranged in 2016, comprehensive national approach to GP cluster working when it started, small groups of practices. That's actually based on theories around quality circles which are established in Europe, that getting those small groups where everyone's involved is actually more likely to produce good quality care than having much larger groups where you're distant. So the idea has got to be local in terms of getting local quality improvement. Agreeing with partners a clear set of outcomes and a means to review them collaboratively, the sort of thing you were talking about with the data earlier on. Improving outcomes through cycles with the same outcomes, or sometimes choosing some other, because you can't do everything all the time. So we've seen the different ways, you're all picking different things and trying to move on the quality agenda, but learning from each other. And an evidence-based approach to improvement, actually showing that you make a difference, because if you're doing something that doesn't work and it doesn't improve outcomes, you have to stop doing it and do something else. And all about collaboration here, working with others in health and social care. So we have to look beyond just our immediate medical model and our world of practices. And if the one thing 2004 contract did, it made us focus internally just on the practice as a business, as a unit on its own, and we've kind of locked ourselves away from the rest of the system. So, in part of the role of the GP cluster was discussion. It was actually Gregor Smith who came up with the idea of calling it intrinsic and extrinsic, so because there was a quality group that was working parallel to negotiations and came up with these concepts. The idea is an intrinsic element of the role and an extrinsic element. So the intrinsic one is a learning network for local solutions and peer support. We've seen examples of that today. It will consider clinical priorities for the collective population. Again, we saw that earlier on today. If it's sepsis, something you're thinking, this might really matter to our community, let's spend some time on it. Transparent use of data, techniques and tools to drive quality improvement. These are skills which aren't necessarily ones we hold. So you're already becoming upskilled in quality improvement in this whole process. And all GPs, I think, have to have some knowledge of that, or else we won't succeed. But the transparent use of data, so the price of not being micromanaged is transparency of the patient's data and outcomes. And we get open to the world, eventually to the public if it's not there already. Everyone can see how the whole community is doing in terms of health outcomes. And we have an open debate about how we improve them, including with our communities going forward. To improve well-being, health and reduce health inequalities, quite explicitly, quite broad concepts of working with the whole community to improve the health of that community. And that's the intrinsic bit. We said if we can't engage extrinsically, we can at least do that. Because at that point we didn't know if anyone wanted us to do extrinsic, because it's more than up to the government, it's up to HSCPs as well. But the extrinsic function would be collaboration with the practice, working with a multidisciplinary team and third sector partners, influencing the priorities and the strategic direction of IGBs as the clinical advisors to the managerial side of our organisations. We are part of HSCPs. We may not always feel like it, but we are, and we should be. Provide critical opinion to aid transparency and oversight of managed service. We should be commenting on how well the services that the HSCP runs. Now, we've had some people in my group talking about how some of them don't run well. And we should be involved in saying that's not producing good outcomes. And we should do the same in secondary care. Ensure a relentless focus on improving clinical outcomes and addressing health inequalities. We should have as part of our role that we keep working on improving those outcomes all the time. It's the outcomes we keep looking to. If what we're doing isn't working, we change what we're doing and we learn from somewhere else. The GP cluster, there's a lot in what the GP cluster is supposed to do. It's a professional grouping of GPs. It's not one that's there for commercial gain. That's quite different to most of the ones in the other parts of the UK. We specifically did not make it a commercial grouping. They're not legally contracted with each other. They don't hold budgets, they don't employ staff. It's all about bringing your professional expertise and advice in, not anything else. You're not going to provide services through clusters. Practice quality leads is what brings in each practice into that. And remember that now the new contract from April includes the equivalent of 2 sessions a month of time to spend either in cluster meetings or doing other stuff. I appreciate you can't always backfill, and that's why we didn't specify how you had to do it. But there has been a resource to each practice for time to get engaged in this. So there it invents the cluster quality lead, which is you, whose role is to facilitate and guide the members and liaise with locality and professional structures. CQLs are not the bosses of clusters. It's an interesting thing because you aren't in charge of the cluster. We talked a lot about being empowered by a cluster and accountable to them. It's a new way of thinking that it's not about being in charge. And the cluster decides, for example, what data all practices have to provide under new contract. So interestingly, clusters themselves are funded by the GMS contract. They're attendance at clusters. CQLs are funded by HSCPs. And in fact, HSCPs have to decide if they want to invest in this extended role for GPs, and they'll do it predominantly through our increasingly professionalised CQLs. And I think it's an investment they have to make if they're to succeed in the future. To engage in peer-led quality improvement, not rushing ahead here, within and across practice, which you're doing, contribute to oversight and development of care within the wider healthcare system. This is 2016, we're quite clear about having an extrinsic role. We talked a lot earlier about using data to do that, facilitate assurance, because it will be assurance of the performance of the overall system, no longer just GPs being quality. But the whole system has to demonstrate quality assurance of the care that's provided by everyone else. And we're talking about all parts of the health and social care system. Cluster leads, it talks about specifically, appointed and empowered by the cluster and the partnership. So you sit between HSCP management and cluster, trying to facilitate and engage those two groups more effectively. But accountable to clusters for delivering change, because somebody has to make things happen in between meetings. We talked about trying to bring back those GPs who are willing to take part in any kind of management. We need to bring them back into the professional fold, otherwise nothing happens between meetings, because no one's doing anything. It needs to be much more acceptable for GPs as part of their career to take on part of cluster quality, the CD, professional management role. We need clinical managers to make things happen. It's not just enough to meet once a month and expect things to happen. To improving outcomes for patients, showing leadership, linking it to the wider system, improve communications, develop the capacity to identify opportunities for improvement. So we have to start understanding that data we've just been talking about. GPs aren't naturally going to be good at that. So the idea of the list workers was that you'll get someone who understands data, can go and get you the data. I've also spoken to Jono before, which I always had the ambition that each cluster would have a public health consultant attached, because I see them as the intelligence arm of clinical medicine, to help us to understand the data and work out whether what we're about to suggest as a change is likely to be successful, and then how to know whether you've been successful afterwards. Because if you don't understand the data and the statistics, you can go down the wrong road, and it's very easy to do that and say what we're doing is working when in fact it isn't. One of the things that led again to develop thinking was this conference, the Quality After Cough conference on 23rd of March 2016, again 2 years before the new contract comes in. This talked about clusters and plan for transforming primary care, because it is much wider than just general practice. Quality circles in Europe was European colleagues telling us these small groups of clinicians work to improve quality. They're at least as good at, if not better than Quaff will be for that. And a lot of discussion about how we have to use improvement science to learn how to make things better. Now, at the same time, in March 2016, I became aware of this guy called Don Berwick. I hadn't really come across before. And it's great. I would encourage you to go on YouTube. He is worth watching on YouTube, by the way. If you put in Era 3 and Don Berwick, you'll find a 7-minute video where he's talking on a radio show and he's explaining what this means. And I strongly commend you to go and look at that. 7 minutes of genius about how the whole culture of healthcare should change. And it actually does underpin the contract. I point out at the bottom here, we mention him on page 26. It's a guiding touchstone of what we're doing. If you want to look at principles for what we want to achieve, have a look at him saying, he's a lot better than me. Then he talks about 3 years in healthcare. The first one was, doctor knows best. Noble, beneficent, we self-regulate, and that was the original way the NHS worked. Doctors were in charge. Wasn't all that brilliant at times? And for the modern world it didn't suit very well. So we moved into Era 2, and this is the era of general management. And it tends to be associated with accountability, scrutiny, measurement, incentives, and market mechanisms. The first one was, trust me, I'm a doctor. This one is, I don't trust you because you're a doctor, tick some boxes and I'll give you some money. To put it in the extreme fashion. Neither of these systems has succeeded. And we all have to be big enough to say, it's time to do something else. And what Don Berwick says is it's either 3 we need to do, and he suggested 9 ways to get there. Stop excessive measurement, abandon complex incentives, reduce the focus on finance, increase attention to quality of care, reduce the professional prerogative. You can't just say, I'm right because I'm the doctor, especially when we're all in one room, we're all saying different things. Commit to improvement science, improve transparency, protect civility. He says that the manners we need in discussing healthcare should be that of the dining table, not the boxing ring. We tend to be belligerent with each other. I'm not quite sure how we got to the stage we are now. Even in your clusters at times, it'll be like a fight. Talking about it earlier, Austin, why do we work that way? In healthcare, it's meant to be nice, friendly, we're meant to be nice to each other, and we just aren't anymore. That's true in management, it's true in clinicians. He suggests you need to become civil and use the manners of the dining table, not the boxing ring, for this to work. And I strongly commend that, which is why we work collaboratively with governments and HSCPs to bring about the contract. We try to show by example that we're going to be civil, and even though we might fall out at times, we can fall out and still carry on working together. Because we accept that you can disagree, and you might even fall out and go to court. It doesn't matter, you still got business to do. We shouldn't fall out because we're falling out for one thing. We're much more grown up. And he also suggests you reject greed because it erodes trust. Now that's across many different aspects of healthcare. And to some extent, the new contract is doing that bit, because we're saying we might limit our ability to profit from healthcare. That's what we're saying. So we're saying some of that, but it also means that we don't end up having people suspicious, as they have been since 2004, if you give GPs money, we'll just keep it in our pocket and it won't change healthcare. So we have to think about that as a profession, but it goes wider than that, and I would commend Don Berwick to you in explaining that. In 2017, we moved on a bit further. The Deputy CMO Group produced quality proposals, which I'll show you in a minute. We started talking about the future role of the GP, and remember this, that the future role of the GP doesn't start till all the changes have occurred in the next 3 years, because I've created capacity. When we're talking about those figures earlier about affecting high healthcare patients, I'd love to do that, but I'm too busy. Okay? When I'm in practice, I'm too busy to do that. So we agreed with the government, our new role comes in once the workspace has been cleared. And you know that's a challenging agenda in itself. So don't be thinking that you can or will achieve all these changes until the transformation of general practice has occurred. Undifferentiated illness remains one of our key areas, and quality and leadership are expressly part of our job. So we have to get good at it. You've been to leadership courses, quality improvement courses. That's got to be the business, part of the business of being a clinician in the future. And GPs will have a voice in the wider system, and much more towards a primary care-led NHS 2017. This framework, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but Greg R. Smith worked on this to try and do some more work on how quality can be improved through this new mechanism. If you're not aware of it, you should probably have a look back at it. Now, in the contract, specifically, and it is signed, sealed and delivered, a new role for the GP Subcommittee, which has existed since pre-NHS days, where GPs get together, elected to represent the profession. Now, only in 2004 did that become a much more transactional relationship about money, negotiating contracts, and a them and us type feeling with the rest of the NHS. So we're reversing that in the sense that we're saying the GP Subcommittee, which is the name that we try to emphasise within the NHS, is going to have a strengthened role to join that Area 3 collaboration with managers in the NHS. It's how the profession will knock its heads together to get us to agree, because there's no point everyone in this room having a different view on how orthopaedics pathways should look. Now, in your local area, how your district nursing works, that's something you can do in your cluster. When you do something that affects the whole system, you can't just say, my cluster wants it that way and your cluster wants it this way. So the purpose of this is to bring together all the clinicians in general practice, the clinical directors, the CQLs and the GP Subcommittee together, to knock our heads together, to get good at forming good evidence-based advice on clinical pathways and changes to services, which we can then give to who you otherwise would call the commissioners, whoever pays for services in the community or secondary care. So these are words taken from the contract. This is not us making up the whole purpose of this, and we called it the Tripartite Group just because there's 3 kind of key groups of clinicians we bring together. but a fresh role for the GP Subcommittee doing this extrinsic function. So we've decided there will be an extrinsic function to provide professional advice, combined advice on the commissioning and planning of processes for integration authorities and NHS boards. So we said that will be part of the GP's role going forward. The CQL will work in close collaboration with the medical advisory structure that's already there, medical directors, clinical directors, strategic planning groups and the GP subcommittees. The GP subcommittee will also be responsible for and funded to do these local arrangements to ensure effective collaboration between these groups of clinicians. And that's the new funding that's coming from the government to fund GP subcommittees, because it's their job to collaborate and bring those groups together to stop us having disparate views on clinical advice, so that we can bring together evidence and agree a combined view for things that affect the whole city or the area, particularly around secondary care. So the tripartite collaboration is in the contract and has been agreed and developed over a long period of time, but we're only just beginning to start dealing with it now. So the idea is, again, each of the clusters around the city, and you can't really read the middle, but it's a GP subcommittee brings together the tripartite group of CQLs and clinical directors to advise the health and social care partnerships and the health board, where it's, because we don't really have commissioning. The problem we're now finding is there's no one to point at, because there isn't actually in Scotland a proper commissioning process. Now, I've only become aware of this, and I appreciate that's a controversial statement, but you know, I've seen a lot of what happens in England. I can't always say it's great, but in Scotland, increasingly we don't really have a process that says how well are we spending the money across primary and secondary care. Now, in theory, HSCPs control 70% of the budget, including an acute. But their actual ability or current engagement with that process and saying how well is it being spent to deliver outcomes, I think, is a bit shaky. So is there a process by which we can provide this advice, and who's going to take it and listen to it? The answer is I don't know yet. So there's a question to the system. We may go through this and there's no one ready to listen to what we have to say. But that's a challenge to Scotland's NHS. My view is that without clinicians involved in this, we will fail. And HSCPs will fail in the process. It is also true, and this is me speaking a bit more politically, that HSCPs have got a big role for local authority elected members. Quite rightly. In England local communities, there's only one other group who can counterbalance their views on how money should be spent, and I think that's the GPs. As established members of the community talking about healthcare, I think you'll be listened to. And I think it's an important counterbalance to the weight of elected members in running HSCPs and local authorities.
So what do we think are going to be the benefits from this new system of the tripartite arrangements? Well, we can expect continuous quality improvement being an intrinsic part of every practice, and indeed of every practitioner within a practice. We would expect a greater focus on outcomes that matter both to individuals and to their communities. And we also expect that practitioners have a voice in the wider health and social care system, with the aim of improving outcomes by action across the whole of the patient pathway. And to remind everyone that this is a core part of the new contract, I end with a quote from the summary within the documents, that we believe these changes will enable the GPs of Scotland to make the best contribution possible to achieving better health outcomes. For those who are or may aspire to become GPs in Scotland, we invite you to join us in delivering for the people of Scotland better health and better care. Thank you.